Acts 7:33 through 34. Now this is Stephen still giving his speech. At this point, he's been talking about Moses for a little bit. It's important to note that the Pharisees would have not only known the Scripture, but they would have known the oral tradition about Moses too, stuff that ain't in Scripture. Anything that would have been, they would have known. There's stories written that ain't in Scripture because of their authenticity or fact that they may be made up. But the Pharisees would have known this. The Pharisees would have probably considered some of these traditions to be as accurate, not as accurate as Scripture, but just right behind it in importance. Today we don't consider it anything other than a bunch of tales, but they would have considered it value. And the Lord said to him, "Take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground." Now this is occurring in chapter 3 of Exodus. This story is just reciting what's happening there, where Moses is at he's shepherding the sheep out in the wilderness by the mountain of God, which we later learn is Mount Sinai, and he sees this burning bush, which is on fire but not burning. And here's the voice of God telling him this. So there's more details to this story. Stephen ain't digging into details because they're familiar with the story. When people know the gospel, it's easier. You don't have to cover as many details when you talk about it. You can overview it and then point straight to the cross. You don't have to tell about his ministry as much if they're familiar with it. These people were familiar with Moses because they were Jewish. Especially this group, they would have been very familiar with Moses. They probably would have known details that Stephen himself didn't know. So instead of trying to sound more educated than he was, and try to say something where he's inaccurate on it, he just gives a simple overview and lets them think about it. And sometimes that's the way we need to relate to the gospel. Because we don't ever need to be in a part where we argue with somebody. Because that's never good. If we're arguing them, we're not bringing them to the Lord. So oftentimes it's better to keep it as simple as we can just to show them Jesus. Rather than get complicated and over-analyze and throw in doctrine right off. Because they don't Christ, they don't need to worry about doctrine yet. But oftentimes that's the thing the world wants to argue with, so it takes you away from the focus of Christ. I have seen the anguish of my people in Egypt, and have heard their cries. I have come down to deliver them. Come, I will send you to Egypt. So God gives Moses a purpose. God sends Moses. God's telling Moses what he's doing. We see in Exodus how Moses is against his purpose, but God calls him anyway and convinces him to go. Moses gives up excuse after excuse. You know, as Christians, sometimes we lean on our excuses why we ain't doing what we're supposed to. And that isn't what he's expecting us to do. While we ain't called to deliver the people out of Egypt, we're to share the gospel, where Christ will deliver people from their sin. We see a relative symbolic view of Egypt with sin. And this happens over and over in the New Testament, where it refers to them coming out of Egypt as the lost coming out of sin to go to Christ. So it also mirrors the promised land with Jesus. So we see this illustrated through Scripture and Scripture. We see here that the reason why God was sending Moses to the people, was because of his concern for them. You know, oftentimes we may see how things are going on in the world and wonder why God's keeping it going. Well, there's a point in time where these Israelites, this wasn't just the fact that the Israelites their cries weren't just now coming. They've been crying for a while now. It's just God was showing mercy on the Egyptians. The reason why the world keeps going is because God's showing mercy. And for God not to show mercy goes against his character, but there'll be a time where it will happen. Just as Egypt was judged, so will the world be. And we're just to do what he's calling us to do in the meantime.